Did you know that roughly 16 million men alive today can trace their genetic lineage directly back to one man who lived 800 years ago? That's about 0.5% of the entire world's male population descended from a single individual. But here's what will really disturb you. This wasn't an accident. This was the result of the most successful, albeit unintentional, genetic expansion in human history, carried out through conquest, systematic violence, and the ruthless application of power. The Mongol Empire didn't just conquer land. They conquered bloodlines. And the methods they used were far darker than any history textbook will tell you. What you're about to discover isn't a story about military tactics or political strategy. This is about how an empire built itself not just through the sword, but through the calculated control of human reproduction on a scale that's almost incomprehensible. The Mongols created what historians and geneticists now recognize as the most effective genetic expansion in recorded history, and the mechanisms behind it were brutal, systematic, and devastatingly efficient. By the time we're done here, you'll understand why modern DNA analysis has revealed patterns that can only be explained by something far more organized than random chance. Let me set the scene for you. It's 12/6, and a man named Temujin has just unified the fractured Mongol tribes under a single banner. He takes the name Genghis Khan, meaning universal ruler, and what follows is one of the most explosive military expansions the world has ever witnessed. Within just a few decades, the Mongol Empire stretches from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe, encompassing more territory than any empire before or since. But here's what they don't teach you in school. This conquest wasn't just about territory. It was about fundamentally reshaping the genetic landscape of an entire continent. Recent genetic studies analyzing over 5,000 men from 127 populations across Asia have revealed something extraordinary. They've identified a Y chromosome lineage that appears in roughly 8% of men throughout a massive region stretching from northeast China to Uzbekistan. To put that in perspective, that's approximately 16 million men at the time these studies were conducted. The variation in their DNA suggests this lineage began around 1,000 years ago in Mongolia, right when Genghis Khan was building his empire. The statistical probability of this happening by chance? Essentially, zero. But wait, there's more. Scientists didn't stop at just one lineage. They identified 11 distinct Y chromosome sequences that show similar patterns of explosive expansion, all originating from Central Asia during periods of nomadic empire dominance. This isn't just one man's legacy. This is evidence of a systematic pattern that occurred repeatedly across generations. And the mechanisms that made this possible will shake your understanding of how empires really work. Foundation of genetic dominance. To understand how this genetic empire was built, we need to go back to the beginning, to the harsh steppes of Mongolia, where survival itself was a brutal selection process. Mongol children didn't have childhood's ass. We understand them. They started riding horses before they could speak fluently. Their playground was the unforgiving steppe where temperatures could swing from scorching heat to deadly cold within hours. Their toys were bows and arrows, and their education was survival itself. Here's the disturbing part. This wasn't just about cultural tradition. This was natural selection amplified by cultural mandate. Children who couldn't keep up, who couldn't endure the cold, who couldn't hunt efficiently, often died. Only the genetically resilient, the physically strong, and the mentally toughest survived to adulthood. The Mongol way of life was itself a filtering mechanism, weeding out weakness before it could reproduce. But the Mongols didn't stop at natural selection. They had something far more calculated. The Yasa, a legal code created by Genghis Khan that governed every aspect of Mongol society. And buried within these laws were provisions that would fundamentally shape the genetic future of Asia. The Yasa gave the Khan and high-ranking nobles the legal right to take numerous wives from different regions and tribes. This wasn't about romance or even simple conquest. This was legally sanctioned large-scale polygyny that became the engine driving genetic expansion across the continent. Think about what this means. The most successful warriors, the men who proved their strength and tactical skill in battle, earned the right to the most wives and concubines. The system created a feedback loop. Success in warfare led to reproductive access, which led to more offspring carrying those warrior traits, who would then join the army and continue the cycle. It was evolution on fast forward, guided by the cold logic of conquest, and the machinery of genetic expansion. Let me tell you about something that will make your blood run cold. When the Mongol army conquered a city, they didn't just storm in and celebrate. They engaged in what can only be described as meticulous selection. The process was systematic, almost clinical in its efficiency, and it reveals the true horror of their approach. First, they eliminated threats. The old and the resistant were killed immediately. Rival noble families were purged, their male lineages systematically eliminated to prevent future challenges to Mongol authority. This wasn't random violence. This was calculated removal of competing genetic lines. The constant warfare and rigid enforcement of the Yasa laws ensured that only the Khan's bloodline and those of his chosen commanders were allowed to multiply and spread unhindered across the new empire. But here's where it gets even darker. The survivors of these conquests were sorted. Skilled individuals were immediately identified. Engineers, siege weapon experts, goldsmiths, doctors. Their talents were co-opted for the empire. But among the most valuable resources extracted from conquest were women. And what happened to them is a chapter of history that's often glossed over or ignored entirely. Historical accounts from the secret history of the Mongols and contemporary Persian chronicles confirm the widespread practice of Mongol men, from the Khan downwards, taking multiple wives and concubines from conquered populations. This wasn't just the historical norm for conquerors. In the Mongol context, it was an overwhelming, mass-scale phenomenon. Women were not partners. They were systematically integrated into the empire's reproductive machinery, forced to bear children who would be raised in Mongol tradition and trained to fight against the very cultures their mothers came from. The numbers tell a chilling story. Genghis Khan himself is reputed to have sired hundreds of children. But for his genetic lineage to spread so widely and so quickly, two things must have been true. First, he and his sons were incredibly reproductively successful due to absolute, unquestioned power that gave them access to a vast, rotating population of women across conquered lands. Second, and this is crucial, his male descendants were highly favored and protected while descendants of rival male lineages were systematically eliminated. This wasn't happening in isolation. Every new unit of 10,000 soldiers raised on the steppe or in the camps of the Golden Horde was a product of this system. The genetic material came from across Eurasia, from the sophisticated cities of the Khwarezmian Empire to the skilled populace of China, from the warriors of the Caucasus to the peoples of Russia. The Mongol military machine operated like a vacuum cleaner for human genetic material, absorbing and integrating it into their expanding empire. Anti-science behind the horror modern genetic analysis has revealed patterns that ancient historians could never have documented. A comprehensive study analyzing genome-wide data from 214 individuals from 85 Mongolian and 3 Russian sites, spanning from 4600 BCE to 400 CE, has uncovered the genetic mechanisms behind the Mongol expansion. What they found was extraordinary and deeply disturbing. During the formation of the Xayong New Empire, the first nomadic empire in Asia, populations that had been genetically separated for millennia suddenly began mixing. This was contemporaneous with the rise of horseback riding, which facilitated unprecedented mobility. But when the Mongol Empire rose 1,000 years later, something even more dramatic happened. Individuals from the Mongol Empire showed a marked increase in Eastern Eurasian ancestry compared to earlier periods, accompanied by a near-complete loss of the ancient Northern Eurasian ancestry that had been present for thousands of years. By the end of the Mongol Empire, the genetic makeup of the Eastern steppe had changed dramatically, ultimately stabilizing into the genetic profile observed among present-day Mongolians. This wasn't gradual change. This was rapid, systematic genetic restructuring of an entire region's population. The scale of this transformation can only be explained by conscious human action, by policies and practices that channeled reproduction in very specific directions. But here's something that will shock you even more. The Mongols didn't just transform the genetics of their conquered territories randomly. Research on modern Mongolian populations reveals that they practiced what can only be described as selective integration. Four-way admixture models show that both northern and southern Western Eurasian ancestry related to Western steppe herders and Iranian farmers contributed genetic material to modern Mongolians. The timing of this admixture? It traces back to a historic period in accordance with the westward expansion of the Mongol Empire. Think about what this means. The Mongols were selecting women from the most advanced societies, from populations known for specific traits, resilience, intelligence, adaptability to different climates. By taking healthy, often educated and racially diverse women from sophisticated cities, they were enriching their own gene pool with desirable traits. Whether this was intentional or merely the result of taking high-status women from conquered elites, the effect was the same. Genetic augmentation on a massive scale. And weapon you never learned to buy. Now we need to confront something that historians often avoid discussing directly, but which the genetic evidence makes impossible to ignore. Sexual violence wasn't just a byproduct of Mongol conquest. Evidence suggests it was systematic, widespread, and served as a fundamental tool of genetic dominance. Historical chronicles from the Middle East, Russia, and China are filled with accounts of mass sexual violence committed by the Mongol horde. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. It broke the will of conquered peoples by violating their women and the cultural sanctity of the population. But there was another effect, one that shows up clearly in modern DNA analysis. At its darkest core, sexual violence was the fastest, most effective method for the systematic propagation of the conqueror's genes. Every such act, particularly when widespread and state-sanctioned or state-ignored, resulted in the forcible insertion of Mongol DNA into the conquered population. The fact that one man's Y chromosome lineage could proliferate so widely and quickly across such a vast territory is a staggering statistical anomaly. It requires not just personal reproductive success from the Khan himself, but the successful, protected, and widespread propagation of his sons and elite warriors' genes throughout conquered lands, often at the expense of local male lineages. The Diego blood group antigen provides another line of evidence. Recent studies examining 75 Eurasian populations revealed that this genetic marker, which reaches its highest frequency in Mongolia, Turkmenistan, and Kyrgyzstan, expanded southward and westward across Asia in a pattern that closely mirrors the Mongol conquests. In northern India, the Diego blood group appears in populations that were part of the Mongol Empire, descended from Mongol conquerors, populations that the Mongols never reached. The genetic marker co-migrated with the conquests, a silent witness to forced reproduction on a continental scale. When the Mongols destroyed Baghdad in 1258, they didn't just massacre the population. They engaged in selective slaughter, eliminating the city's male ruling class and scholarly elite while sparing skilled artisans and young healthy women required to provide the next generation of subjects for the new Mongol-led regime. This was the ultimate application of genetic acquisition: erase the genetic and cultural past and forcibly initiate a new Mongol-dominated genetic future. And a living blueprint. The Mongols' approach to human reproduction becomes even more chilling when you understand they used the exact same principles they applied to breeding their horses. Mongol horses weren't majestic thoroughbreds. They were small, tough, incredibly resilient ponies bred specifically for endurance, not speed. But the Mongols didn't leave this to chance. They maintained strict, systematic breeding practices, selectively breeding for specific traits required for warfare, the ability to survive on sparse steppe grass, the stamina to travel 100 miles a day, and the discipline to travel 100 miles a day, and the discipline to stand still in battle under terrifying circumstances. Only the toughest, most proven horses were allowed to breed. Weak foals often didn't survive the harsh winters, and poorly disciplined horses were quickly culled. This was eugenics applied to livestock, a clear, effective system designed to maximize military utility. Now here's where it gets truly disturbing. The Mongols' methods for people mirrored their methods for horses with eerie precision. The most successful warriors, the human equivalent of champion stud horses, earned the right to the most wives and concubines. The harsh life on the steppe, constant campaigning, and brutal discipline of the Yasa acted like the merciless winter, killing off those who couldn't keep pace. They introduced new bloodlines from captured healthy women to improve resilience and aptitude, much like introducing desirable breed traits into horse stock. The Mongols approached human reproduction with the same cold, strategic pragmatism they applied to breeding their horses. It wasn't about moral value or individual rights. It was about creating a tool of empire. The elite, genetic lining. While the mass of the army was the product of this harsh filtering system, the top tier of a Mongol society operated under an even more controlled breeding protocol. The sons and grandsons of Genghis Khan, known as the Altan Uruk or Golden Family, were the result of a hyper-specific, privileged, and deeply controlled branch of genetic perpetuation. These weren't just princes. They were the living proof that the system worked. They received the most intense focused training regime the medieval world could muster, combined with access to the best available genetic resources through strategic marriages with princesses and noble women from conquered kingdoms. The succession system ensured that empire leadership was consistently drawn from the most successful and genetically dominant male line. The common soldiers provided the brutal mass and physical might of the horde. But the sons of the Khans provided the strategic genius, the organizational framework, and the unrelenting political will to keep the empire expanding. Generation after generation, the system refined itself, creating leaders who combined the warrior traditions of the steppe with administrative skills learned from conquered civilizations. Transformation of identity. One of the most visible yet least discussed consequences of this decades-long genetic project was the profound, rapid evolution of Mongol physical identity. This wasn't just cultural shift. It was visible genetic change happening in real time across generations. The original core Mongol tribes were genetically and culturally homogeneous, but their policy of forced integration and systematic selective breeding, taking women from Iran, the Caucasus, Russia, and China, created an army and empire that became incredibly diverse. The Mongolian look became an ever-evolving phenotype. Each generation showed more variation as genes from across Eurasia mixed into the Mongol population. This genetic diversity wasn't seen as weakness by the Mongols. It was proof of their power, visible evidence of how far their conquests had reached. A Mongol warrior might have ancestors from 5 different ethnic groups across 3 continents, and this was celebrated as a demonstration of empire. The genetic mixing accelerated with each generation, creating populations that were fundamentally different from their ancestors just a few generations earlier. AIM machinery revealed. So how did this de facto system actually operate? The Mongols didn't need laboratories or genetic sequencing. They had 3 simple, terrifying steps that functioned with devastating efficiency. Election through conquest served as intake. They systematically slaughtered the old and resistant, leaving behind the young, healthy, and skilled. These were the genetic stock acquired from all corners of Asia. Forced integration served as mating protocol. Women were distributed among warriors and leaders according to rank and success in battle. The most successful men gained access to the largest, most diverse selection of women, guaranteeing their genes were massively amplified. This ensured that warrior traits were passed down by those who successfully survived the rigorous selection process. The crucible served as quality control. Any children born from these unions were raised under the unforgiving conditions of the horde, ensuring only the physically and mentally toughest survived to maturity. The brutal environment was the final non-negotiable filter. The chilling truth is that the Mongol Empire was simply too vast and too successful to need centralized breeding facilities. Every new military unit raised on the steppe was a product of this system. Their strength was a direct result of genetic robustness from assimilation combined with cultural hardening from brutal military life. Genghis Khan created an environment where only the fittest warriors could breed, and only the toughest children survived. The law that made it possible, the Yasa, Genghis Khan's legal code, contained a specific section titled Reproductive Policy, but the social laws within it created enforcement mechanisms for bloodline control that were brutally effective. The silence was perhaps the loudest part. The Yasa didn't need to mandate selective breeding because it mandated a social structure where only those already contributing to the horde's power were allowed to survive, prosper, and reproduce. The laws concerning desertion and insurrection meant anyone threatening military hierarchy faced death. This systematically filtered out the disloyal and rebellious from the gene pool, leaving only the most obedient and disciplined. The laws of succession protected the legitimacy of the Khan's lineage with meticulous clarity. While Mongol men could take countless concubines, children born to primary wives, often chosen strategically from powerful families, were given precedence. The system created a closed loop. Obedience led to survival and rank led to resources. And reproductive access led to proliferation of obedient genes. It was brilliant and horrifying in equal measure, a self-reinforcing mechanism that perpetuated itself across generations without need for explicit breeding. Mandates. A final calculation after conquest, surviving populations would be sorted with cold efficiency. The criteria for selecting women focused on 3 key areas that reveal the calculating nature of this system: physical health and resilience was paramount. In an age of high infant and maternal mortality, selecting women who were visibly healthy, robust, and capable of enduring harsh nomadic life was essential. A strong mother was more likely to survive childbirth and raise a tough child. Reproductive potential meant prioritizing young women with many reproductive years ahead. This maximized the biological return on conquest. Specific conquered traits involved selecting women from groups known for intelligence, literacy, or specific skills. While the Mongols didn't have IQ tests, they understood that children of scholars in well-organized societies often carried useful, trainable aptitude. This process was systematic. After conquest, survivors would be paraded or sorted. The old and resistant were killed. Men were killed or enslaved for labor. Young, healthy women were selected, integrated, and became part of warriors' households. The Mongols ensured their warriors were fathered by the most successful, toughest men and mothered by the healthiest, most resilient, and often most intellectually capable women of the conquered world. The resulting children were, by definition, products of violent state-enforced, natural and artificial selection. Our legacy, written in DNA, the genetic data doesn't lie. Modern studies have identified not just one but multiple successful patrilineal lineages originating from Central Asia during periods of nomadic empire dominance. Besides Genghis Khan's lineage, researchers found another originating around 850 CE and spreading westward, possibly along the Silk Road. These civilizations fostered dominant male lineages as sons of fecund founders established satellite outposts, where they in turn fathered powerful descendants. For a lineage to leave such a lasting legacy requires multiple generations fanning out over wide geographical areas, with high probability that sons will also have many sons. This doesn't happen by chance. It requires social systems that allow powerful men to father children with multitudes of women, combined with protection and favoring of male descendants while rival lineages. The Mongol Empire achieved something that seems almost impossible when you look at the numbers. They changed the genetic makeup of an entire continent in just a few generations. The Eastern Steppes genetic profile underwent dramatic transformation that stabilized into what we see in present day. Mongolians. This level of genetic restructuring across such vast territories and diverse populations doesn't happen through random mixing. It requires systematic, sustained policies that channel reproduction in specific directions. Studies show clear evidence of sex-biased admixture patterns. There are signals of male-biased genetic contribution in Mongolian populations, corresponding to specific Y chromosome lineages appearing in some Mongolian individuals. This tells us that the genetic mixing wasn't equal or random. It was directional, with Mongol male lineages spreading into conquered populations while maintaining their dominance through social and political structures. Uncomfortable truth. What the Mongol Empire achieved wasn't the result of a formalized eugenics program with geneticists and laboratories. It was something arguably more effective, and certainly more brutal. An entire social, legal, and military system that functioned as a massive selection mechanism. The Yasa provided the legal framework. The military hierarchy provided the incentive structure. The harsh nomadic lifestyle provided environmental filtering. Sexual violence and forced integration provided the mechanism for genetic expansion. And the systematic elimination of rival lineages provided the clearing of competitive genes. The terrifying brilliance wasn't in battle plans, though those were formidable. It was in the accidental large-scale application of evolutionary principles to human society. Genghis Khan created an environment where only the fittest warriors could breed, and only the toughest children survived, producing an unstoppable force that spread his genes and those of his chosen elite across a continent. This was the most successful, albeit unintentional, program of genetic expansion history has ever witnessed, and the evidence is written not in ancient texts or crumbling monuments, but in the DNA of millions of people alive today. Every genetic study that traces lineages back to Central Asia during the Mongol period, every statistical analysis showing improbable concentrations of specific Y chromosome markers, every population genetic survey showing the geographic spread of these lineages, the same conclusion. The Mongol Empire conquered the world not just with horses and bows, but with a system that weaponized human reproduction itself. They transformed conquest from a political act into a biological one, ensuring their dominance would echo through generations long after their empire crumbled. The scale, efficiency, and lasting impact of what they achieved remains unmatched in human history. But here's the question that should haunt you. If this level of genetic dominance could be achieved without modern science, without genetic testing, without laboratories, simply through social structure, legal codes, and the brutal application of power, What does that tell us about the mechanisms that shaped all of human history? Ray, how many other genetic legacies are written in our DNA from empires and conquerors we've long forgotten? The Mongol genetic legacy isn't just a historical curiosity. It's proof that the winners of history don't just write the history books. They write the genetic future of entire continents. And that legacy lives on in the DNA of roughly 16 million men today, walking, breathing monuments to an empire that understood power in ways we're only now beginning to comprehend through genetic science. If this disturbing chapter of history shocked you, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. The genetic secrets of ancient empires go far deeper than you think, and in my next video, I'll reveal another hidden genetic legacy that's been hiding in plain sight for centuries. Comment below and let me know, does learning about the genetic